Okay, we're live. Andres, thank you for joining me. How you doing?
Pretty good, guy. What about you?
Good. It's been a busy week. We launched dxp360.com, which we will talk about in more detail in another episode. This episode, we're dealing with um, the confrontations and the argumentations happening on LinkedIn right now between various factions inside and outside the Mac and composable space, if you will. But yeah, it's been exciting. Looking forward to the next few weeks as we get more customers on board. But it's been exciting. But well, yeah, why don't we focus on our discussion today, which is this back and forth on LinkedIn, which is kind of like um, I'll let you handle it. You jump in. You jump in and tell me like what happened here.
Yeah, it's I refer to it as the MACH versus Monolithic Mayhem because that's pretty much what it's been. So the first kind of instance of this, so I think sometime last week, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, um, Amazon Prime Video, their engineering team, they made an announcement they'd saved like something like 90% of costs by moving from microservices back towards a monolithic architecture. And as you know, like the whole thing, a lot of Mac composable and just in general with me preaching has been composability. Mac is better than the monolith. Monolith is the enemy. It's not what you want to be. So the first instance of this came from David Hansen. He is the CTO of 37 Signals. They're the guys who run Basecamp and the Hey email platform. So his input was basically on microservices itself. So he said basically there's cases where microservices architecture makes sense, but I think they're few and far between. The vast majority of systems are better served by starting and staying with a majestic monolith. Um, he goes on to say that just like anything else, a lot of people say it depends, and that's what we preach with microservices, composable anything. It all depends on the situation you find yourself in. And but he also adds, just saying it depends helps nobody answer anywhere make bad decisions. You might well find other justifications within your system or organization, but they should be clearly articulated, rigorously examined, and critically challenged before embarking on microservices. So it's part of like the blog post and one LinkedIn post that he made regarding that topic. So Kelly Getch, the chief strategy officer at Commerce Tools, co-founder of Mac Alliance, one who run the Mac Alliance, he quoted this to kind of weigh in on the notion of microservices. And he says, microservices, while duplicative and inefficient from a compute standpoint, allow you to release stuff really quickly, which is a trade-off that most organizations at scale are willing to make. Microservices exist to reduce communication pathways, not to solve technical scaling challenges. He also makes two other points, which bring in the concept of MACH, and he says it's never pure MACH versus microservices discussion, it's a spectrum. So he says the Mac Alliance aren't zealots. Like they're cases where microservices will make sense, there's cases where it won't. And he said that members in the Mac Alliance, they're required to conform to microservice principles, but that's not an internal implementation detail. It's an internal implementation detail. So it's basically saying that not everything that they do has to be Mac. Some of it can be monolithic or however they want to compose it. And then finally, Sandra Remecki, she's the CEO at Consia. She weighed in and built on, not necessarily, I'm not sure if she built on this, but throughout the week, there's been debate. Last week where we spoke about the whole concept of Mac washing, I've seen a lot more about on LinkedIn. So it's just kind of had these thoughts in general, kind of like open letter to the Mac community. And said one of the key goals in the Mac Alliance is to advocate for technology practices that are right for the customer. Recently, I've seen some folks within our community using language that's creating divides within the larger ecosystem, and by doing so, pushing others away rather than welcoming them to understand what Mac is all about. They're creating a perception that Mac folks are just a bunch of elitists who think they're better than everyone else. And some other points you mentioned, the fact that organizations of a certain size maturity might be best suited to adopt Mac, and not everything needs to be Mac. So my initial thought on all of this whole microservices versus monolithic debate, this whole Mac versus monolithic, Mac versus composable, what have you, is that, and this is a comment I saw in one of these posts, I'm not sure which one, but these are the sort of debates that always happen. So everyone picks a side of something and it's like, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and whatever you were doing before doesn't cut it anymore. And we see it with also technology, and it's definitely a tech thing, but it's also human nature. Like if you think about the debate of Mac versus PC and like iPhone versus Android, I'm a Mac guy, I'm an Apple guy, but like I used to be an Android. It's just a better fit right now. But I remember when these things first happened, I have like friends who are like software engineers. So like they're on the tech side too, and they're looking at it like, no, your Android isn't good because of this, this, this. And I'm like,
Yeah,
are you sure?
yeah. I mean, so
So it just seems how it
yeah,
goes.
so that I like your example here with like the Mac versus PC or Apple versus Android. It paints a good picture of like how there can be a lot of zeal for one end of the argument, and if it's not this, then it's no good, right? The good news here for enterprises or companies looking at these two options is that unlike Apple versus Android, it's not either or debate, right? That's the good news here. The silver lining of this debate for the customers is not either or. You can actually have you can attempt to build the best of both worlds. You can do that, and in many ways, that is the beauty of Mac and Composable is that you don't have to shun your legacy systems or monolith systems. You don't have to. You can actually build around them. You can you can build things with Mac and Composable over on this end of your business, but keep things monolithic on that end of your business. Whatever suits you best, or suits your team best, or suits your architecture best. So that's the good news here. It's not an either or thing. The other thing is that, as you mentioned, is this back and forth. There's definitely it's not a bad thing. I'm about to say it's a healthy business thing. Both ends of the spectrum have vested interests, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think that's a dirty term. I don't think it's a dirty or disgusting thing to have interests in a software because you founded the software or you work for that software company, so on and so forth, or you're part of that alliance or you're not part of that alliance. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just important for people to know who's who in the space, and understand where they're coming from, right? Who are they? What alliance are they part of or not part of? Are they actively resisting an alliance, so on and so forth? And everyone will have undertones of potential bias in there. And again, I don't think that's a negative thing. That needs to be there in order for the education to happen, right? If no company ever has any bias, then we'll never hear anything. It'll just be a silent marketplace, and everybody will be confused. So these discussions are healthy. You need to understand the landscape from that perspective. Um, and I guess I know you've got some more points here, but I guess this is a good segue into what I was going to mention, which is this is part of the reason why we've launched dxp360.com with the directory, so that customers can start to make sense of who's who in the space, who are the microservices, who are the monoliths, what options do we have when it comes to the headless CMSs or the CDPs or the analytics systems or search systems, what is out there, what can be mixed and matched, what is already mixed and matched already with integrations ready to go, and so on and so forth. Because as of right now, looking at this from the outside looking in, if you're not putting the time to understand both ends of the argument and figure out where the middle ground is, because again, like I said, there is a middle ground, which is taking the best of both worlds and taking what suits your company infrastructure, then it can get confusing, right? And that's the issue you want to avoid. That's you mentioned mayhem. It is mayhem. From the outside looking in, it does look like mayhem, and I feel like agencies specifically have a bigger weight on their shoulders going into this next 2, 3, 4, 5 years to educate their customers more, right? To educate them in a way that's somewhat in the middle ground, right? Again, many agencies have their own biases, have their own partnerships and alliances, but there needs to be balanced education of enterprise coming in and saying, hey, here's where we're at. These are the trends we're seeing. What should we do? Should we jump ship and go this way? Should we do it slowly, slowly? Should we stick where we are? There needs to be personalized, bespoke, tailored advice, right? And it needs to be like, it needs to be matching what that enterprise is actually looking like. Because as they did mention, to give credit to everybody here, everybody did allude to the fact that in some cases, microservices is the way to go. In some cases, it's not, and so on and so forth. So that needs to come out a bit more. And other than that, after that, it's more just like a bit of zealous pushing to the end of the spectrum that makes sense for the individual person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And one point you didn't mention there is like over the next 3 to 5 years. I think that's a very, very important point. Like for even an enterprise implementation, it takes months. Like even though we in certain cases we promote that it can take a few weeks, it's easy to do this.
Yeah.
That a lot of it depends on the size of the organization. Like the bigger the organization, even medium-sized
Yes.
enterprise or whatever, it's gonna take time to even implement it. Then you need to see how long it's going to take to get an ROI. Like even the Mac Alliance that launched maybe 2 years ago, I'm sure like they've now started maybe get data here and there, but I don't think we will really be able to look at MACH,
Yeah,
Composable, Monolithic
exactly. Yeah,
across the board for another 3 to 5 years and really say which one is best. It's going to depend, like, certain cases we are, but like, what is this is undoubtedly the best. I think for a while it's gonna be a very very piece company by company
yeah,
factor. Yeah.
yeah. I agree.
Um,
Go ahead. Sorry.
and just another thing, just reading through some of these, like just these LinkedIn posts, some of the comments from, like, because the original post was very engineer and developer focused. I think another thing that weighs in on that is these concepts like compose and map. They're actually very technical. Like, we touch on them a lot from the business side of things, but when you actually really get into it and making that decision, it's a super technical undertaking. And I think it's only recently headless itself, and what, I've been running with headless for 3 years now, give or take. Only recently, because like across the board, start to feel like, okay, I think everyone now knows what headless is, more or less. I think we're still a long ways
Yeah,
away from that
yeah,
being happening for across the board with composable map and the entire concept.
yeah. I agree. And to your point initially, it taking 3 to 5 years for us to really see, who comes out on top, so to speak. I don't think it will be in that sense who's coming out on top. I do think we're seeing the pendulum swing towards Mac and composable. It's undeniable as of today, and I do think it will continue to swing that way. It's just a case of how much will it swing, right? Is it going to be, right now we're looking at like less than 10% of like enterprise companies, however you want to describe that, however you want to define that, sorry, using, non-monolithic, non-monolithic, non-legacy systems. I do think that'll pass the 10% mark. I think it'll probably pass the 20% mark. Will it go 30, 40, 50, 60%? That's a bigger question that I'm not sure about. And at this moment in time, it doesn't really matter. I think because, again, the point is, it's not a black and white issue. It's not a case of, okay, 20 to 30% of enterprises are using just Mac products or Mac aligned products or your Mac Alliance products. That will, I can't see that happening. But a mixture, again, enterprises finding that good mixture, that good balance between what needs to be monolithic, what needs to be Mac and composable, then that's more likely what we're going to see. And that won't really be easy to enumerate and say, okay, these guys won, these guys didn't win. I feel like both of these have their own strengths and weaknesses. I think we'll see that. But no doubt, the Mac composable trend is trending, and that paradigm shift is happening to an extent. One thing I do want to touch on, though, is in David Hanson's LinkedIn post. He's quoting nobody type of thing. We're going to break up the monolith and somehow find the engineering discipline we never had in the first place. Now you went from writing bad code to building bad infrastructure. When I first read that, I was like, okay, that is a really good point. I think that's a really good argument here. But as I thought about it more, that's not really what Mac is pushing for. It's not really I mean, that's kind of what Sitecore is doing, which is breaking down their monolith and trying to, have a composed for you system. But the Mac and composable trend is more about existing microservices. Again, we say microservices. We have to be clear about this as well. In this context, the microservice is more like different SaaSes, right, rather than like actual microservices in traditional sense. Different SaaSes that can be integrated, right, or have already been integrated, and you build like that, and that's how you build your system. So I'm not sure. The more I think about it, I'm not sure that argument really exists on the Martech front of the side of things. He was more alluding to like how Amazon had restructured their underlying infrastructure, but that doesn't really that particular argument for me doesn't hold weight when it comes to what the Mac Alliance, for example, are pushing, in my opinion. But an interesting debate for sure. Head over to DXP. Where should you head now that we've moved to dxp360.com? dxpreport.com is still where you can find the newsletter, and we'll link to the relevant LinkedIn posts there. So if you haven't seen these, you can catch up. But yeah, I think we're gonna stop now, and we'll do a new podcast about DXP360 and take it from there. And again, before we do leave, what I just said also links to DXP360 because you can again go and find out, okay, this SaaS, who do they integrate with already, right? So we can go and already start sort of piecing together that Mac and composable ecosystem. But anyway, more about that in the next episode. Andres, thank you for your time.